How many slides more do you have? It's
Well, it depends
300.
on which items your board would like us to address. We have a slide with specific questions and options for
Why don't
each
we
of
do
those.
that? We'll do that, and then we'll take it to the public comment.
So the first category that Mr. Savage talked about was the cap on cultivation permits. So the board direction from last July was that we limit the cultivation permits to 100. Based on the urgency ordinance and the number of registrations that we've had, 455, we're seeking direction on whether your board would like to keep that current limit, increase, decrease, or look at limiting through other means. And then also whether that cultivation cap of 100 should include nurseries. So nurseries are similar to cultivation. They're the ones that are growing the starter plants, propagating the starter plants for the cultivators to grow to maturity. So whether you would want to include those within the cultivation cap. The selection of permit holders, how should staff allocate those 100 permits should your board choose to keep a cap? Use a point-based system, lottery, first come, first serve, seeking direction on how to actually pick down those 100. Based on the registrations, it's obvious we're probably going to have closer to 400 or 500 applications, and we need to figure out a way to pare those down. Distribution of the cultivation permits, should they be limited? How would you like to see those distributed throughout the county? A couple different ways. Just pick the 100 best that come up. And that would be based on the selection criteria once we receive all the applications. You could limit those or distribute them based on land use category. So X number of permits for agriculture, X number for rural lands, etc. You could do that based on planning area. With the urgency ordinance, we had 455 registrations. 291 of those were within the Carrizo planning area. Of those, 288 were within Cal Valley, which currently proposed would be excluded based on zoning, so that leaves about 3 within the Carrizo planning area. We had 89 in North County, 48 in South County, 10 in the coastal zone, and 4 in San Luis. So if you wanted to distribute those 100, we could maybe look at those percentages on where the registrations came in. You could do it based on district or some other method. Also, if we were to cap the cultivation permits at 100, it's very likely that the coastal zone land use ordinance would not be effective at the same time as the inland ordinance. So the inland ordinance, once your board adopts it, would be effective within 30 days, assuming no lawsuits. The coastal zone land use ordinance has to go to Coastal Commission for certification. That could take anywhere from a couple months to a year. So if it did take a year, would we save some of those 100 for coastal zone applicants? We talked about mixed light grow. Currently, the June ordinance talks about indoor cultivation and outdoor cultivation. It's tied more to the structure or lack thereof. So whether your board would want a separate definition for mixed light. Storefront dispensaries. So back in July when we were talking about dispensaries and your board directed us to leave the dispensary ordinance as it is, Prop 64 hadn't passed yet. So now that Prop 64 has passed, should we open those dispensaries up to recreational as well as medical? And should we allow dispensaries, whether recreational or medical, in the coastal zone? Currently, the medical dispensary ordinance only applies to inland portions of the county. Along with dispensaries is delivery services. Part of the trailer bill allowed a provision for dispensaries to operate without a storefront. So whether that is something your board would like to see, there's a couple options here, but allowing deliveries from permitted storefront dispensaries, allowing deliveries from dispensaries that don't have a storefront but are located warehoused somewhere in the county. A couple options there. Question about caregivers. So caregivers would be growing for qualified patients. Question on whether the caregivers should be required to provide a declaration from their patient so we can kind of know who's a caregiver for whom, not doubling up on that. Saw a little bit of that with the urgency ordinance registrations. And then should caregivers be allowed to grow up for 5 patients or just 1 patient? 5 patients, they could potentially be growing 30 plants. With 1 patient, it would be the 6. Your board direction from July requested a limitation on the number of licensees, I believe it said, per site. Staff is seeking a little clarification on whether you would want a limit on the number of land use permits, cannabis land use permits, or if that meant state licenses per site. Little different there. We can talk about that on what those would implicate. That's it with the questions. The next steps, maybe we come back to this after we discuss, or I can go through it now. It's up to your board.
I think you can do it now, just so everybody's on the same page.
Okay, so after your board gives direction today, we're planning on returning to the Planning Commission later this summer. The Planning Commission will be reviewing the public hearing draft, which results out of the direction today. They will make a recommendation to your board, which we will be returning to sometime later this fall. In between that time period, we will be coming back to extend the urgency ordinance. Currently expires on September 19th. It's unlikely we will have a permanent ordinance in place at that point. One thing to think about when we're extending those is, as I mentioned, that time difference between the effective dates of inland and coastal. And then we also will be back to your board in July for a taxation fee discussion.
Okay. Great. Any questions? Supervisor Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out before you go to public comment, because most people probably are not real familiar with, with county process on stuff like this, that Planning Commission, after I guess the board set some guidelines and directions today, Planning Commission is ultimately where a lot of the heavy work is done. It has been done obviously in the past for ordinances and projects, and that's true here. So that's going to count as, that's going to be as important as anything, because that they will spend, which is why we have a Planning Commission, more intense time at the even granular level than the board typically does. So that's important to think about and even to communicate to others who couldn't be here.
Thank you.